taking us down into the match. It's Reid's Golgari Yawgmoth. It is Corey on this Goryo's Vengeance deck that has, I don't want to say taken Modern by storm. Storm is unfortunately not very good in Modern, but
taking it by Reanimator.
Taking it by Reanimator. Taking it by the graveyard. No, it's really cool though that this Goryo's Vengeance has been around Modern basically since the beginning. And it's very neat that this new iteration of the deck plays out honestly very differently than sort of the old versions that would be kind of all in on comboing with an Emerald or something.
Yeah, this is a deck that ends up having a bunch of backup plans that sort of have that evoke a grief and then use Ephemerate or touch the spirit realm or something like that to play both sides of the combo, where they can save your Atraxa from going away or let you get that early double Thoughtseize grief draw.
Yeah, so in this one, it looks like Corey's sitting on a lot of the tools he wants. Faithful Mending, Tainted Indulgence. Those are both discard outlets. Ephemerate, Grief.
Speaking of a discard outlet.
Yeah, so we'll see how he wants to get things started here. Reid has a pretty decent looking hand of his own. Got his colors of mana, has the turn 1 mana dork. So first step from Corey is to grief Reid's hand, and we'll see what he wants to take here. If you're staring down double Baumeister's Haywire Might, Chord of Calling with your grief, what is the thing that scares you the most at this point?
So I think at this point we are going to see at least one Baumeister's go away, probably both of them. Chord of Calling, a card that gets a bit worse whenever you're low on resources, and a double grief draw is just going to really reduce things.
Yeah, you said it. Look at that. So Reid untapping now. Dryad Arbor, maybe not the ideal draw there. Doesn't have a lot of options. There's no real Chord of Calling now that the Dryad Arbor's in your hand, especially. Haywire Might has no targets, but you play it out anyway. So looks like a pretty textbook grief ephemerate start from Corey here. And he's got the Archaeologist and the Mending to rebuild his hand. So firing on all cylinders is the Esper Goryo's deck here.
Yeah, and something we're about to see on Corey's upkeep is the big difference between the white savior guy cards and the black one is this Ephemerate is actually going to get a third card with the grief here.
Yeah.
So this is another reason that Chord of Calling's good, or leaving the Chord of Calling's good, is because it did end up stranded in Reid's hand.
Yeah, honestly, just textbook from Corey here. And this is, look, when Corey said that what drew him to this deck is that the first time he played it, he surveil landed a Gristlebrand into his graveyard, and then on turn 2 reanimated it. Well, this game looks nothing like that. This game looks like he's playing a control deck, just the grief plan, honestly. But it shows you you talked about a deck having a lot of backup plans, and it's got just plenty of action here. Teferi's going to come down, probably just bounce the Dryad Arbor, denying Reid even more mana, drawing Corey another card. Looking really good from his seat here.
Yeah, and one of the things that this Yawgmoth off the top kind of highlights on Reid's side is that Reid is also really low on black sources. Delighted Halfling, good at casting Yawgmoth, but it's still kind of a turn away, which is pretty brutal here.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to just have to pass back to the Goryo's Vengeance deck with an active Teferi.
Ooh, you know how Teferi gets to roll up in the Thoughtseize? How about draw step Ephemerate?
How about it? Not bad. This deck is. I didn't look. I was on the opposing side of it in the first round. I didn't get to watch it do all of its tricks with knowledge of its hand. But yeah, it's pretty fun watching Corey pilot this thing. I can see why he was having a lot of fun.
Yeah, right. Against you, especially in a mill deck, all your cards kind of do similar-ish things, right? It's a redundancy sort of deck, whereas Yawgmoth being very A plus B, grief is going to be so much more effective here.
Well, if Reid does want to get back in it, a young wolf has joined the hand, so he's piecing together, pieces of the combo if he gets to do anything about it. But this is probably an average number of griefs, I would say, for this deck.
Well, average is in Corey plans to do between 2 and 9 griefs a game, and we're at 4 now. So we're approaching an average number.
Pretty good. Ticking up one more here with another Ephemerate rebound, but nothing to hit anymore. So instead, you don't hit the grief, you hit the Archaeologist, you refill your hand, This deck has all the tricks available to it. There's a fourth land as well for Corey. So what is he worried about in this spot? Look, he's got control of the board, but Reid has some things in play. What does Corey need to do to actually turn things around here? He does not have the Goryo's Vengeance, nor does he have a particularly scary reanimation target at the moment.
I think at this point, the biggest thing that Corey is worried about is Reid just finding a copy of the namesake of Reid's deck in Yawgmoth, just because
Hmm.
that's going to actually let Reid get a burst of cards by blinking and sacrificing this Yawgmoth a bunch, or not necessarily blinking, but wiping the counter off of it and sacking it again, and so on.
Right.
That's probably the easiest way for Reid to make up the resource deficit he's under right now. But Corey has identified that sort of color screw situation we talked
Right.
about before, going after Delighted Halfling with Prismatic Ending rather than Young Wolf.
Yeah, that was really key in Reed's match earlier when he was able to find a second black source. So Corey, having just seen that, cuts him off wisely of the second black source here. So even if he were to find Yawgmoth, he can't do anything with it. Now, Bowmasters is at least a draw that puts some more pressure on the board. Now, with Teferi in play, of course, it's quite a bit worse as a sorcery. See, nothing that it can pick off at the moment.
The nice thing about this Bowmaster is it can at least theoretically buy a turn against Teferi Time Raveler. It also makes
Right.
all of these draw spells of Corey's basically worthless. Maybe not literally, but not, they don't have much worth.
Yeah, that maybe you could get away with one to find an answer to the Bowmasters, but that's about it.
Right. And Bowmasters does just do a pretty good job of suppressing a lot of what Corey's deck is trying to do. It's
Mhm.
pretty okay against Teferi Time Raveler. It's really nice against Gristlebrand, and all of these ways that Corey has to spin his wheels, it's just going to punish so hard.
Look at that. Reed pings the grief and then attacks with 3/1/1s.
I'm assuming these are a Teferi, and this is largely a play to try and prevent Corey from getting any closer to just getting to activate Teferi again.
Mhm.
It also just creates a spot where he likely gets to get 2 damage on the Teferi for pretty close to free, and otherwise it would only be 1 damage if he just pinged the Teferi with the Bowmasters.
Yeah, and then you'd have to lose a creature on your attack without a trade. Really astute play there from Reed. So Corey fetches out a surveil land, but it does not surveil a reanimation target. In this case, we're talking about Crystal Brand or Atraxa into the graveyard. So Reed, out of cards in hand, plays out Boseiju, passes the turn, and oh, it's another ephemerate from Corey.
Well, I hope Reed wasn't planning to draw a good card. I mean,
Oh,
there are some
Corey.
things that he could do here that could be hilarious. Like if Reed were to top deck Nurturing Peatland, that would be an extremely funny draw.
Yeah, that would not work there for Corey to be able to get. So that said, I mean Corey is in a full control here. Reed is really looking to try to dig out of it. Now, if he can somehow find a way to get a Yawgmoth into play, a Court of Calling, for instance, then he might be able to go somewhere. Now, the problem with that Court of Calling is this Teferi. People always forget about Teferi, and I'm not going to. It would not
Yeah,
allow Corey or Reed to use a freshly drawn Court of Calling in its.
and note that Corey is actually choosing to use Ephemerate on the Philology Archaeologist rather than trying to draw step during Reed's turn, noting that Reed still doesn't have that black source. So even if
Right?
Reed drew a Yawgmoth, he can't cast it. So it would have to be more or less exactly the card Court of Calling.
Yeah.
I guess the Agatha's Soul Cauldron would also be really good here. That's one that you can just exile the Yawgmoth from Yard and have basically this orc token as well as one other thing on Reed's side of the battlefield, gaining all of Yawgmoth's text.
It's hard to tell here. I think Corey found another ephemerate off of uh the archaeologist, but he's actually going for a different line here. He's going to hard cast touch the spirit realm, and he's going to exile the Haywire Might from Reed, or at least, attempt to. It's going to target the Haywire Might.
Yeah, a lot of what's going on here is just trying to actually get cards off of Reed's side of the table. Corey
Hmm.
realizes that if both players get a bunch of extra resources, Reed can do literal infinite damage.
Right.
And Corey's kind of capped in only doing extremely powerful things.
Yeah. Well, and he doesn't have too many of them available to himself right now. I know there's a Solitude that's introduced. But again, with no Goryo's Vengeance in sight, it's all kind of underwhelming in terms of actually ending the game.
An ignoble hierarch, really awkward for Reid here, where attacking wide means something dies to grief, but attacking with only one creature means the archaeologist gets to block for free. We also see a Solitude in Corey's graveyard. I'm not seeing a reanimation target just yet.
Well, there's one in hand. Atraxa is drawn along with Goryo's Vengeance hitting Corey's hand. So Corey now, with the tools to go off, limited on mana more than anything, passes up his Teferi again. So now he is at least finding a line towards ending the game, which is what you need to do against the Yawgmoth player. You don't want to give them the opportunity. We saw how swingy and powerful just Yawgmoth as a deck can be and how it can generate advantage out of seemingly nowhere. So Corey is definitely incentivized to try to close the door as quickly as possible on this. And it looks like he's going to go ahead and Faithful Mending to get a couple of Atraxas into the graveyard. Now he is set up, it looks like, with the perfect, he's got land, Goryo's Vengeance, Ephemerate.
All right, Orcish Baumeister is going to get to shoot down the grief as a result, and Corey's casting the Goryo's Minions, gets the Atraxa like you talked about. And at this point, this just shows that Corey really wants to put his foot on the gas and say, all right, we're turning the corner. We've hit that part of the game, especially when he drew this white source off of Faithful Mending. It means he can ephemerate the Atraxa to keep it around.
Yeah, honestly, a really nice Faithful Mending. Faithless Looting, of course, not legal in Modern anymore, but Faithful Mending doing a pretty good job in its place. And this Ephemerate angle is, of course, one of the coolest innovations. Except, I think it's pretty cool when it's doing this. When it's blinking a bunch of griefs on turn 2, maybe it's not as exciting. But resetting the Atraxa, now it will not get exiled to the Goryo's Vengeance trigger. It'll stick around for Corey. He has all the cards he wants, and Reid basically has to find a way to draw into an infinite. I think.
Yeah, now it's just an embarrassment of riches on Baumeister's side, right? We even see a Solitude that can be free cast.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine Corey losing from this position. Oh, he has 2 Solitudes, one of which he is now pitch casting.
All right, fair enough. I think this will probably clean it up. He takes it down. Takes down the creature. Reid going to take a draw step here. And it is a delighted halfling. He is not, I would say, very delighted to see that in the spot. And with that, he sends the game over to Corey Baumeister, up 1-0.
Yeah, and pre-board, this was going to be a tougher one for the Yawgmoth side of things. They're a bit less explosive, and some of the interaction points early on are just so hard to fight against. Looking at the sideboard from Reid's side, there are copies of Endurance, which help with that reanimation plan. Anything that can actually tack any sort of artifacts or enchantments that these decks can bring in, Reid his answers to. It doesn't look like Corey really brought any of them. But there's so much graveyard hate out of the board between Endurance, between Scavenging Ooze, and then Court of Callings that can find all of these cards.
Right.
This gets a lot better for Reid post board. Unclear to say if it ends up being great in the grand scheme of things, but you can see him Reid mousing over Shielded, trying to figure out, is this really what this matchup is about?
Well, he's also got Fulminator Mage in there right now, which I love.
Yeah, and that's always a tough one to figure out how potent that one's going to be, right? Where we do see some basics on Corey's side, but Corey has so many 2-mana spells that if you can get something like a Fulminator Mage under an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, it is really hard to actually just play a game of Magic if you're in Corey's seat.
Right. Yeah, Agatha's Soul Cauldron has just been a complete. It basically surprises me with the things it can do almost every day I watch it play a tournament. You know, it's one of those cards that just the more you play with it, the more ridiculous it becomes. And you've been playing this deck for several weeks now, right? So I'm sure you've experienced all the fun tricks.
Yeah, I have a bunch of weird cards in my deck, like Walking Ballista, where the most common time Walking Ballista comes up is Court of Calling for 0, put Ballista in your graveyard just so you can put it under Agatha's Soul Cauldron. It's just like, oh yeah, of course. Why wouldn't that be what Agatha's Soul Cauldron does?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's obviously what Walking Ballista was made to do.
Right, exactly. And look at that Fulminator Mage right in the opening hand for Reid.
Unfortunately, he ships it back. I love that card. I played a lot of Living In back in early Modern, and you used to play Fulminator Mages there. It was so much fun.
And looking at Reid's configuration of the deck with 4 Hierarch, Ignoble Hierarch, and 4 Delighted Halfling, you can tell he really prioritized having these early mana creatures to get off the ground.
Yeah, we saw how dangerous it is to play one toughness dorks against in a field of Orcish Bowmasters, but no Orcish Bowmasters from Corey to punish this. So it's just a very strong mana dork here for Reid to get things started. He's got a Cauldron, he's got a Bowmasters, and there the Fulminator Mage reappears.
Fulminator Mage with Agatha's Soul Cauldron at the ready. This actually, like with Bowmasters, this is a lot of strip mines. Now Reid kind of, he doesn't want to just jam it out here.
Right, because the polluted delta.
Right, exactly. At that point, if Corey smells what's going on, then he can just get a basic island and go about his life. You really want to try and get your opponent with it whenever you do something like this.
So with that said, Reid with the option of playing Cauldron or passing, chooses to just pass with the Bowmasters and Corey. He knows that there is a Fulminator Mage in the sideboard, right? But doesn't play around it. Gets a Surveil land, is does not, looks like he keeps the card on top, so not surveilling a reanimation target into the graveyard. It doesn't realize what awaits him in Reid's future.
Right, this is a spot where all of a sudden Fulminator Mage might just knock Corey back to square 0? And square 1 feels a bit generous here.
Well, yeah, I guess the good news for Corey is that your combo, if you look at it that way, is not particularly mana intensive, but you do need to get off the ground at some point. He has a Solitude in hand, though, so that won't actually help against the Fulminator Mage, but it does give him some amount of interaction with the board.
Well, and look, the basic swamp got milled for Baumeister, which is a lot of information if you're in Reid's seat.
True. Good call. So Reid thinking about how he wants to play it out. His Overgrown Tomb is going to unlock basically everything in his hand. And now he also has access to Endurance if he were to want it. Definitely a lot to consider, because he knows that Corey, after sideboard, is full of interactive cards.
Oh, interesting. Getting the extra attack in with the Orc Army. I love this.
Yeah, because Corey, of course, wants to keep his O3 around. He doesn't want to risk it in combat because he wants to be able to blink it with Ephemerate.
And every multiple of 7 that Reid can change off Corey's life total matters against the Bristlebrand draws. So 15 and 12 is actually a really big break point, even though it might seem insignificant at a glance.
Yeah, no, great point. And the Fulminator Mage does what it does best. Land down for Corey, draws another Surveil land coming into play tapped. Actually, quite the punishment here. Has his basic island. So for this turn at least, has access to all of his colors. The problem, if you're Corey, is that you can't play a 3-mana spell. Your Solitude, you don't, whatever. You could Celestial Purge away the Bowmasters if you wanted, or you can try to set up. Because Corey, of course, not knowing about the Soul Cauldron, doesn't know that there could be very many more Fulminator Mage activations in his future. Might go for a line here where he just tries to set up Goryo's Vengeance for the next turn.
Well, awkwardly enough, that Tainted Indulgence isn't castable because the basic Corey has is Plains.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, and the Sewers comes into play tapped, so not that many options, and just pulls the trigger then on the Celestial Purge, getting rid of the Bowmasters.
And this is one of the really interesting spots where cards that can be instants, a lot of times you're just supposed to cast as sorceries because at this level, you just want to know what your cards are going to do before you play them, or when you play them, right?
Well, and you don't want to let Reid untap into, possible Court of Calling type things, and just giving access to that extra resource, and just even untapping with it is a resource you want to. This is a big one. This is a big resource. Is this Agatha's Soul Cauldron hitting the battlefield for Reid, followed up by Halfling here. What is what is the game plan here if you're Reid? Where do you go?
I imagine at this point we're just gonna see the kind of mediocre beatdown plan, as it is affectionately called from time to time, where really it isn't anything that impressive, right? You just hear, well, yeah, they're attacking for 3. Who cares? But probably care a lot whenever you can't get more than 2 lands in play at the same time.
Yeah, just absolutely locked underneath the Fulminator Mage at this point.
Right, we see Agatha's Soul Cauldron exiling the Fulminator, and it looks like Corey is gonna go ahead and Solitude something here.
So does the so until the Fulminator Mage is actually exiled with the Soul Cauldron, the creatures don't have the ability. So is this a window for is that true? Is this a window here for Corey to interact?
It is somewhat the thing that Corey's weighing is, what are you actually trying to accomplish with this Solitude? And
Hmm.
say you use the Solitude, exile the Orc, then Reed still is the option to put the counter on Ignoble Hierarch or Delighted Halfling
Right.
and blow up the Watery Grave. It's whether or not Corey wants to give him the opportunity to make that choice. And it looks like he is just going to say, no, I really want to go ahead and just get this Orc out of the way, which does at least force Reed to theoretically get rid of a mana creature if he wants to use the Fulminator mode.
Yeah, it's a 1-for-1 mana trade in that circumstance, although one much more advantageous to the deck full of mana dorks.
Right, right.
So Corey has also been holding on to this grief in hand, has not opted to do anything with it, and now has untapped with just a single plains in play and a surveil land of his own, which does not find any big target to put into the graveyard. So the good news, I guess, if you're Corey, is that Reed is seemingly low on resources with not many cards in hand and no creatures in play. And so if you can just dig out from underneath it, you might feel you have a chance. Unfortunately, if you're Corey, this is a really nice draw from Reed, right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it really is. And one of the funny things going on right now is normally you want to proactively endurance away Corey's graveyard, right? It
Mhm.
hurts Tainted Indulgence, it makes it harder to reanimate things. But you don't actually want to put something like fetchable lands back in Corey's deck whenever you're
Right.
trying to Fulminator him out.
Yeah. So we'll see how Reed wants to play it here. Young Wolf hitting the battlefield.
All right, and it looks like he's going to exile Solitude, put a counter on Young Wolf, and valuing the mana from
Yeah.
Ignoble Hierarch over Young Wolf as an undying creature, which makes sense.
And there you go, though. Wow. Well, Corey needed something, or the game was just over. Unfortunately, the land he found is not one that allows him to cast any of the black cards in his hand. This is looking very good for Reed, who has the ability now to actually just flash in the endurance hard cast and just attack with it because Corey is sitting at 9 life.
Yeah, we might see Corey go for broke and simply try and pitch cast Grief and then touch the Spirit Realm to save it. Oh, or just
Wow.
hold up
Okay.
the channel and touch the Spirit Realm. That makes some sense.
Yeah, if he feels like he needs to find uh, some way to the faithful mending or something to get to get some action going, things into his graveyard to set up the Goryo's vengeance. You could look that way. The endurance actually doesn't send Corey's graveyard to his library at all, as you mentioned, and Grist now off the top for Reed.
Oh, and this is a free creature every turn, right? To use with that
Yeah,
Agatha Soul Cauldron and eventually Fulminator Mage and so on. So that is actually a really huge draw here.
interesting. So Corey takes the damage down to 3. Grist going to hit the battlefield for Reed. See how he wants to play this. Go ahead and make the token. I'm not really sure if Corey is, if he had some ways back into this, they are quickly running dry.
Yeah, at this point, I'm not really sure what he's hoping to find. I'm expecting an upkeep counter on the insect and blow up the fountain, but we shall see. Might go on Ignoble Hierarch if Reid is playing around Touch the Spirit Realm, then trying to get Corey to blink the token instead. All right, great.
Yep. Yeah,
Corey's
of
like,
all the
don't
lines
sweat it.
available, yeah, of all the
Yeah.
lines available, that one made the most sense.
Yeah, Corey just saying, listen, man, you don't have to figure out how to get your last percentage point. Let's pick them up.
Well, on to game 3. Wouldn't have it any other way between these two very accomplished Magic players. The Fulminator Mage, it did it. It did the party trick, the one of Reid Duke doing Reid Duke Jund things. Even when your deck's Golgari finds a way to play a red card and blow up land.
And you could see for a second there, it looked like he was considering, do I actually want to still have that in my deck for this game? Or do I think the jig is up? And he left it in.
Maybe just maybe calling it out, maybe saying, hey, check this out. How cool is that?
Yeah, I mean, you do in fact have to hand it to him. It was pretty cool.
All right. Well, here in game 3, this hand this is a probably going to be a mulligan for Reid with only one land. Corey looking at 2 lands, some grief, some Goryo's Vengeance. That looks like a pretty strong hand for him. He's even got Prismatic Ending to interact with Reid's early board.
It's pretty interesting, right? It feels like it almost does several things, but there isn't a way to put a creature in the graveyard.
Yeah.
There isn't a way to blink a creature. It does have both colors of mana. It's not clear if this hand is going to be good against, say, the Fulminator Mage draw.
I was to say, gets blown out by that again.
Right. So I think you're supposed to keep this if you're in Corey's seat, but this is maybe, if it is 51% to keep and 49% to mulligan.
Yeah. So Reid needs to find a land. That was the decision he made here. It certainly, from a deck with a bunch of mana dorks and plenty of lands, it makes sense. And this gives him the ability to play a little more reactively since he's on the draw anyways, and Thoughtseize Corey's opening hand here. And he sees what you're talking about. There's not a ton going on, right? If you Thoughtseize this hand, you're not in any imminent danger per se. So maybe even if he wants to take the grief to protect his own hand, he can. If he decides, there's plenty of cards in my hand, I want to take Goryo's Vengeance or Teferi away from you instead, he can do that as well.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I almost want to just take Teferi because it's the generic kind of card advantage thing. And
yeah,
if Reid bricks on the land, this game isn't going anywhere anytime fast. But this grief is one of the cards that can just kill Reid.
Yeah, the thing is, I hear you though, because grief, if Corey were to draw obviously Ephemerate, the grief becomes nutty and it becomes a clock. The Teferi is just the advantage, as you mentioned, but it actually he opts for he decides I'm not going to lose to anything silly this game. I'm gonna pitch this Goryo's Vengeance. And it's a good thing he did, isn't it?
Yeah, this is exactly what you said Corey was telling you earlier, where the Surveil land, Ben the Atraxa, turned to Goryo's Vengeance. Very heads up line from Reid, just playing around averting disaster and doing
That's right. It would have just been over.
Yeah, that would have been bananas. Yeah, there's Touch the
Spirit
Realm.
Spirit Realm.
What do you call it whenever you should have taken one thing? I guess you can't evoke grief anymore. So taking Goryo's Vengeance hurt both draws? Wow, Reid is so smart.
He's pretty good at this rock thing.
Yeah, so. Honestly, I hope it's no wonder he won that Pro Tour.
Unfortunately for Reid, he did not find his second link here. And that is we'll see what happens, because this is going to very possibly allow Corey to just slam Teferi.
Oh, it looks like he actually exiled or banned grief too. Corey did on a Surveil, which is kind of surprising to me given his hand, but maybe he's just trying to play a more reactive, controlling game. Okay, forest off for Reid. This is where it starts. Wall of Roots. And Wall of Roots has just got to be one of the unsung heroes in this deck because it is just 2 resources for Court of Calling and frequently is making 2 or 3 mana a turn between Court of Calling and casting stuff on your turn.
Yeah, so Reid pulling himself back into the game, as you mentioned, as you called it, averting disaster, giving himself an opportunity to find the land to get back into the game, and now he is. And Corey is the one actually now looking for lands, not finding them. Honestly, doesn't have a ton going on. He could grief if he wanted, but Reid's going to untap with access to mana and the ability to start going off, and all of a sudden Corey's on the back foot.
Yeah, if you're in Corey's seat, I imagine you're just weighing, do I want to interact with Wall of Roots or do I want to attack Reed's hand? I think I like this prismatic ending line here, especially when you're choked on mana. That card falls off pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Land off the top of sight for Sore Eyes for Reid, given that he gets to Wall of Roots, and then Baumeister's in the same turn now. Whew.
Yeah, this is all developed very well for Reid. Missed the second land drop. No worries. We'll get there. And here he is, arriving there.
Oh, nice. Also, just going ahead and casting Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which means
Hmm.
that he now has insulation against Goryo's Vengeance.
Yep. Atraxa hits the exile zone.
I love this line.
Well, Corey does find a land. It's a good one. It's an untapped land. It gives access to a second black mana if he needs that. It's a something. It's a start. So what if you're Corey now? You're not just out of it because you've hit your third land. What's the line? You can Teferi. You can maybe work grief in there. What are you thinking?
At this point, it's pretty tough. It feels like he's trying to work Grief into a combo turn or something to that effect. So seeing him cast a Fairy Time Raveler isn't that surprising at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Bouncing Wall of Roots, trying to kind of keep Reid in the development stage of things.
Yeah, knows that Reid misses land, so if he doesn't hit another, he's restricted to just 3 plus the wall, and hitting the Blooming Marsh isn't going to give him any mana this turn. Reid just rebuilding the board, able to pick down Teferi. I mean, the problem is that turn was really just treading water for Corey, and with it ending with Teferi not in play and him not finding a fourth land, this is starting to get a little dicey.
Yeah, this is the point where he really might just be priced into going ahead and pulling the trigger on this Grief. As Reid has fewer and fewer cards in hand,
Yeah.
blinking the Grief is also worth progressively less. And this Tainted Indulgence, a black card you can't really cast into Orcish Bowmasters.
True. Yeah, Corey could also be. We've seen him hardcast Touch the Spirit Realm. Um, if he thinks that Reid doesn't have much going on, he could go for that line. Or if he keep his options open here, as he maybe can grief and then think about it, right? So definitely some different options available to him. It looks like he's considering leading out with the grief, taking a look at Reid's hand, finding out that it's not cards that he wants to play against. These are extremely good cards now that Reid has developed his mana this far.
There's even a scary notion where, let's say you grief and discard Yawgmoth, right?
Mhm.
As one might assume that you
As you
should
would,
do.
yeah.
This Agatha's Soul Cauldron is actually pretty great, or makes Reid pretty excited that a Yawgmoth has hit the graveyard. Because
Yeah.
it just means that Reid gets access to Yawgmoth's text box for no mana.
Yeah, right now Reid essentially has 3 Yawgmoths in his hand and 1 Yawgmoth in play if Corey griefs a Yawgmoth, right? Like it's something. It shows the resiliency of the Yawgmoth deck, right? And really the power of Soul Cauldron.
Right. And you end up in a position if you're in Reid's seat, or excuse me, if you're in Corey's seat, where there's just so many things you need to answer at the
Yeah.
same time.
Okay. Well, he's gonna start as one might by getting rid of Yawgmoth and then ephemerating his grief to point at Reid's hand again. Maybe we'll take the second Yawgmoth.
And I kind of think what we might see here is even touch the spirit realm to go again.
Well, he could get all 3 if he did go that way. Instead, it looks like
Okay.
he's just gonna lean on the double Celestial Purge in hand to let Reid resolve Yawgmoth and then try to exile it. But Reid can just turn this token into a Yawgmoth. as
And
well as the wall, or not the wall, but the token.
I do like this because it also gives room for Touch the Spirit Realm to just exile the Agatha Soul Cauldron forever.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just Corey trying to figure out how to make his interaction line up against the cards that Reid has access to.
Okay, well, Celestial Purge number 1 resolves. Reid, after all of that happens, untaps with a Soul Cauldron that's got a couple things underneath it and draws a really key one here, I think, which is Grist. This will,
Uh,
this is, we've seen Grist and Soul Cauldron already do some really silly things today. And I wouldn't be surprised if that might be happening again. It looks like Reid starts by just making the token with Grist. Now Corey is still he's fought back a little bit. He's successfully not been comboed despite a bunch of scary cards in play. And he's got Celestial Purge to interact, but I'm just not sure he's going to find the time to answer everything. Like you said before, he just gets drowned out in the card advantage here from Reid.
is an interesting attack. I guess it's just kind of free if you're planning to sacrifice the orc anyway. Hmm.
Well, we're
Disverting
thinking
Catacombs can also represent a Dryad Arbor, which is both another thing to hold a counter, as
Mhm.
well as another creature you could sacrifice to Agatha's Soul Cauldron, granting the soul of Yawgmoth to everything on the battlefield. All right.
It looks like, yeah, it looks like that's what we saw here. And now Reid, cycling through his deck, is able to take the grief off the battlefield and have endurance in hand, although nothing to pitch to at this
Well, if the one thing's for sure, Corey is not going to do the graveyard thing this
moment.
turn.
Oh yeah, this is Corey trying to play this reactive game, just falling behind here a little at a time. It seems like touch of Spirit Realm, probably going to get pointed at the Soul Cauldron, which is at least removing some of the uh, the more ridiculous aspects of.
And this is a lot of the strength of the Yawgmoth deck in general, is that it is constantly threatening this combo. But
Yeah.
between Grist and Yawgmoth, it is just able to have a sort of endless stream of cards with Yawgmoth and Baumeister is giving you interaction. Same with
Hmm.
Grist. Endurance says target player on it, right? There's so many things this deck can do that all happen to point towards a combo.
Yeah, it's one of those things when people think about older formats of Magic, they often think about decks that can win as early as turn 2, and this deck can reanimate a a Traxa or Gristlebrand on turn 2. It can do that, but most of the time, Corey's deck doesn't do that, and Reed's deck can do these wild things where it gains infinite life on turn 3 or 4 and kills you. But most of the time, it doesn't do that. Most of the time, you get very interactive games of Magic like this one that Reed has navigated very masterfully, and is looking like he's just going to probably pull away here with Yawgmoth available to throw down.
Right. We're seeing this weird sort of you give your Wall of Roots another mana ability to flash in an endurance to make another attacker. And
Hmm.
it ends up being you have to mix 5 creature abilities to get 1 extra mana.
Yeah.
And that's what I think makes this deck intimidating to a lot of players, but it's so rewarding if you can do it.
Well, that really speaks to modern and to Pioneer to an extent, where whatever the best deck is matters, and that's obviously what people talk about a lot in the wake of Violent Outburst banning and all of this. But what matters maybe a lot more than what is some theoretical best deck is how well you know your deck. There's so many lines available to Yawgmoth, and that goes for every deck. The more you can learn how your deck interacts with the field in a format like Modern, the better off you'll be. Now, Reed clearly had a plan for what he was doing here. He was able to execute on it, and he's got Corey up against the back foot on the clock, on the life total, on the cards, on the board state. This is it's back up against the wall here for Baumeister.
I mean, that being said, there really isn't much interaction left in the tank for Reid at this point. A tainted indulgence from Baumeister could end up just saying, "All right, great, rip Gristle, Brandon, Goryo's vengeance,
Mhm.
and go to town."
Yeah. Yeah, he's gonna need it because his life total is under threat from all these dorky little creatures that got bigger from the Soul Cauldron over time, and just Reed sort of spamming them out into play. This endurance representing 3 points, not irrelevant.
Right, you're absolutely correct. We see what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points on the table with Grist threatening another point of damage. There's even a degree where Delighted Halfling, or excuse me, Legend Ruling Grist from hand can add another point to Grist's ultimate. And if Grist dies to its ultimate, that's another point, I think. Okay, yeah, Reed's not going for the kill. He's just trying to be disciplined and not die to a combo kill at this point.
Yeah, he opts instead of even keeping his clock as fast as possible, goes for the cards, and is able to find, unfortunately, from one sense, not anything that interacts directly with the graveyard. He's able to find Fulminator Mage here, which can obviously blow up one of Corey's blue or black sources if you want to try to take him off a little bit of mana. And when Corey is needing to use something like Tainted Indulgence to get his graveyard filled in the first place, getting him off of black mana can be pretty important. That's what we see Reed do.
Yeah, it just adds another piece to that puzzle of things that
Yeah,
Corey needs to go right or perfectly now in this case to even stay in the game, not even necessarily win it.
yeah. It's just a hole. It digs a little bit. It digs a hole a little at a time. You think you can dig out of it. I've got this answer. I got that answer, but it just grinds out these small advantages, even in a game with no infinite combos. So Corey is at 7 life. He's got good cards in hand. Touch the Spirit Realm is interaction. Tainted Indulgence is a way to keep going. Ephemerate, of course, is powerful, but he might not have time to make any of it work, right? Like touch a Spirit Realm, even if you get rid of one thing from Reed's board, 7 life is no more than just a couple turns.
Right. And right now, Corey's technically facing down lethal because of Grist's ultimate, being
Hmm.
able to deal another 2 points.
And touch the Spirit Realm is not. I believe it can't actually target Grist.
Correct. Yeah, it is creature or artifact.
Yeah, so not exactly an O-ring because it has that channel ability. And it,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously Reed has a second Grist in hand, so it's not like Corey could cut him out entirely on it. But it comes up here, so he does pull the trigger on casting it. He's going to probably just target the endurance because he's got to protect his life total by removing 3 points of power.
All right. This is not something anyone is happy to do.
Yeah. What a game by Reed. Missed his second land drop in this and has worked his way back to this board state. He's just ground his way through Corey's Goryo's Vengeance deck, capable of some really explosive things. And now he's looking like he's in a position to go 2-0.
Right, and this is the beauty of a lot of creature combo decks is even if your combo doesn't come together, at the end of the day, they have your pieces have power and toughness,
Yeah.
right? Whereas Corey's had this Tainted Indulgence, has these Touch the Spirit Realms, which is not that Banishing Light or what have you is a terrible buyout or pity prize, but it isn't winning the game, and
And that is
Reed
Reed
Duke
Duke.
is winning.
Reed Duke takes it down over Corey Baumeister.